Rumors of a possible sabotage plot against Lewis Hamilton are spreading fast. Stay until the very end if you want to see the leaked document that reveals the engine advantages Charles Leclerc has been enjoying over Hamilton. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. When the transmission between Lewis Hamilton and his race engineer suddenly dropped for 37 uninterrupted seconds, the racing world barely paused. To the commentators, it was nothing. To the audience, a fleeting glitch. But for Hamilton, that void wasn't technical, it was intentional. That stretch of emptiness wasn't silence. It was rejection. It was a barrier drawn with surgical precision, a red line delivered without a word. In a sport driven by constant communication, feedback loops, and split-second strategy, the deliberate absence of guidance wasn't just sabotage, it was a statement. And Hamilton, locked inside the cockpit at full throttle, understood instantly. This wasn't miscommunication. It was exclusion, and it carried the weight of something far more dangerous than any mechanical failure. He didn't need confirmation. He didn't need someone to admit it. He felt it. He knew. The moment his questions went unanswered, tire life, delta times, pit call, he didn't just feel alone. He realized something unspoken had shifted. This wasn't Ferrari losing connection. This was Ferrari making a choice. To isolate. To control. To mute. And it shattered every assumption he had carried into the season. Every press conference, every smiling PR session, every promise of collaboration and legacy, they all crumbled in the shadow of that silence. His arrival at the Scuderia had been celebrated like royalty returning to a throne. The headlines painted it as fate. The sport's most decorated driver teaming up with its most storied name. Journalists called it poetry. Analysts dubbed it redemption. But beneath the red veneer was a rot nobody outside Maranello could see. Ferrari hadn't recruited a champion to build around. They'd installed a symbol to hide behind. Hamilton hadn't been brought in to lead. He'd been hired to shield. To distract from internal dysfunction, bureaucratic stagnation, and crumbling authority. And the silence wasn't a glitch, it was the veil being lifted. He'd seen signs before. Technical sheets arriving half-complete. Adjustments made without consultation. Race briefings more theatrical than tactical. Input acknowledged but never integrated. He chalked it up to growing pains. Cultural difference. Transition. But it wasn't adaptation, it was orchestration. His knowledge wasn't being welcomed. It was being filtered. His authority wasn't being respected. It was being diluted. And now, on lap 34, in the middle of a knife-edge strategy sequence, the truth hit like a freight train. They didn't want his voice. They wanted his image. His silence wasn't an accident. It was their ideal. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. But Hamilton didn't flinch. He didn't beg for explanation. He didn't scream into the void. He absorbed the betrayal like he'd done countless times before and made a decision. If they wouldn't help him, they couldn't stop him. He recalibrated. He adjusted his driving, compensated for tire drop-off using instinct alone, realigned his race plan mid-stint, all without input. What was meant to break him did the opposite. It lit a fuse. It opened his eyes. And from that moment, the season changed. Back in his motorhome, the investigation began. He combed through logs, compared onboard footage with pit data, requested radio backups. He asked for strategy documentation. What he received was incomplete, redacted, delayed. Files misplaced. Communications unavailable. Access suddenly restricted. The doors were closing fast. But Hamilton had already stepped through. He wasn't chasing answers. He was collecting patterns, gathering proof. He built his own system, his own archive, his own fortress of truth beneath the red facade. While Ferrari thought they had distanced him, he had been mapping every crack in their structure. What followed wasn't a resurgence. It was a rebellion. A silent, precise, devastating resistance executed at 200 miles per hour. His laps sharpened. Overtakes became surgical. Tire usage turned strategic in ways the simulations couldn't anticipate. He began dictating the flow of races, not with pit wall input, but with sheer instinct and grit. And the paddock noticed. Other teams saw the fire return. Commentators stopped asking, "What's wrong with Lewis?" and started asking, "What's Ferrari hiding?" Inside the garage, the tension thickened. Mechanics exchanged cautious glances. Engineers tiptoed around questions. Strategy meetings grew colder, shorter. The wall between Hamilton and the team wasn't just metaphorical, it was operational. Channels were rerouted. Messaging cleaned. Every interaction felt like a chess move. And still, he delivered. He exposed weaknesses in their planning by outperforming their intentions. He drove setups they hadn't tested and made them work. He turned flawed plans into points. Broken strategy into brilliance. Behind closed doors, the leadership panicked. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. What they'd hoped would be a ceremonial swan song had become an uncontainable uprising. Horner's quiet influence within the technical structure, once celebrated as a masterstroke, now appeared increasingly fragile under the pressure Hamilton applied. Because the silence, those 37 seconds, had not removed him. It had revealed him. And now, the greatest driver the sport had ever seen wasn't just behind the wheel. He was dismantling their fiction lap by lap. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Ferrari's internal order began to collapse. Engineers started leaking small truths to trusted journalists. Sponsors questioned their investment strategy. Advisors debated whether Hamilton should be brought into strategic meetings they had previously locked him out of. The machine was cracking under its own hypocrisy. And Hamilton, he kept racing, kept pushing, kept smiling. Not the smile of a man playing along, but of someone who had already seen the ending and was driving toward it without fear. The silence became a spark. The spark ignited a fire. And the fire spread. Not in fury, but in precision. Ferrari tried to adjust, to reassert dominance, but it was too late. Hamilton had taken the reins, not by force, but by excellence. By proving, again and again, that no strategy could defeat the truth written in lap times. No misinformation could outrun the facts. No suppression could outpace determination. And in every corner, every braking zone, every DRS activation, he wrote his response, not in speeches, not in interviews, but in performance. Because what was meant to isolate him had only intensified him. Those 37 seconds were not a pause. They were the ignition sequence. And from that moment forward, no one could silence him again. Inside the heart of Ferrari's operation, far from public view, behind layers of tradition, luxury, and carefully rehearsed narratives, a quiet and merciless conflict was unfolding, one that had nothing to do with lap times or tire compounds. It wasn't visible on the timing screens, nor whispered about during driver interviews. This wasn't a glitch in performance or a coincidence of poor luck. This was something far more deliberate. A subtle yet lethal structure had already been erected long before the world celebrated Lewis Hamilton's signature. It wasn't built to support him. It was engineered to absorb him, to reduce his influence, and to preserve the throne that had long been promised to another. The announcement was a media hurricane. Hamilton in red, an image so powerful, so emotionally charged, that it temporarily blinded everyone to the deeper realities. Billboards across Italy, documentaries in production, endless photo shoots capturing the new era. It felt like a renaissance. But what was presented to the outside world as a collaboration between titans was, in truth, an ambush wrapped in velvet. Ferrari knew exactly what Hamilton brought: his experience, his magnetism, his precision. But what they feared most was not his skill on track. It was what he represented: authority, autonomy, disruption. From day one, the cracks began to show, not loudly, not openly, but with surgical subtlety. His first days in Maranello were met with handshakes and smiles, but behind closed doors, a different plan was already in motion. The team spoke of cooperation, of unity, but internally, everything was calibrated to maintain control, not to share it. Engineering protocols were structured so that Lewis's feedback would enter a slower loop. Simulator feedback was labeled experimental. Technical requests were reclassified as non-priority. His surroundings looked identical to Leclerc's, but functioned very differently. He was given run plans that made little sense. Brake mappings shifted session to session. Data sheets presented incomplete overlays. His input was appreciated, but somehow always postponed for future reviews. Meanwhile, Leclerc's side of the garage operated with the precision of a private army. His car settings were dialed in with eerie accuracy, his prep sessions finished early, his software updates installed on time. Hamilton was placed in a state of constant recalibration, where every outing felt like driving a moving target. The explanations were clinical. Just collecting comparative data. Testing alternative lines. Gathering baseline metrics. Phrases so sterile they couldn't be questioned, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Hamilton was being delayed, not directly, strategically. He was being kept in a loop of endless adjustment, forced to adapt to a car that never stopped shifting beneath him, while Leclerc glided through clean, linear progressions. Briefings reflected the same imbalance. Leclerc was surrounded by familiar faces, confident voices, clear strategy. Hamilton, on the other hand, found his debriefs constantly adjusted. New engineers rotated in, setup suggestions arrived late, discussions cut short due to time constraints. And yet, through all of it, he said nothing publicly. No cryptic messages. No post-session frustrations. He absorbed it like a machine built for storms. But what they didn't realize was that every delay, every block, every stone placed in his path was feeding something dangerous. Something precise. Something unstoppable. He started decoding the trap. He memorized which data packages were missing. He tracked patterns in delayed telemetry. He learned the rhythm of the obstacles, when they came, how they shifted, who delivered them. And he adapted, not with complaints, but with execution. He began anticipating the car's erratic behavior. He rewired his own racecraft to function with incomplete support. He created performance from fragments. While they gave him a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, he carved new shapes and completed it anyway. Leclerc kept pushing forward, supported by a fortress that had been constructed around him for years. His speed was real. His talent undeniable. But what he hadn't faced, what he wasn't built for, was a threat like this. A driver who didn't just survive adversity, but fed off it. Hamilton's performances became sharper, cleaner. He began outpacing expectations, finding pace in places the simulations said he shouldn't. And the whispers began again, different this time. In garages. In paddocks. In media circles. Not about favoritism, but about fear. Fear that they hadn't contained him. Fear that they'd provoked something much worse. Even the engineers on Leclerc's side started noticing how Hamilton's race runs, despite erratic setups, kept closing the gap. How he executed overtakes when the strategy left him stranded. How his tire management exceeded projections. The question wasn't if he was catching up. It was how. And that question began spreading, growing louder, more insistent. Because nothing explained it. Not the tools, not the data, not the prep. What Hamilton was building wasn't a comeback. It was a counterstrike. Not fueled by drama, but by data. By a relentless mechanical dismantling of the system designed to hold him in place. And that's when the structure around Leclerc began to bend. Slightly. Quietly. But noticeably. Pressure doesn't shout, it whispers through hesitation. Strategy calls that once came instantly now took longer. Decisions that used to favor Leclerc without question were suddenly re-evaluated. The machine was no longer certain. The walls were starting to pulse. Hamilton never looked for validation. He didn't need the team's blessing. What he needed was cracks, openings, flaws in the architecture. And he found them, not because they were obvious, but because he had been taught to see what others missed. Every time he was left out of a meeting, he watched body language. Every delay became a pattern. Every error became a signal. While they tried to confuse him, he built a blueprint. And he executed it, piece by piece. This wasn't rebellion. It wasn't defiance. It was a surgical campaign. One executed with a scalpel, not a hammer. And Ferrari never saw it coming because they assumed silence meant compliance. What they failed to grasp was that Hamilton didn't need noise to dismantle a fortress. He needed time. And now, that time had run out. Because what's happening isn't an underdog story. It's not a tale of redemption. It's an invasion. Quiet. Calculated. Merciless. A driver turning their own resistance into fuel. A legend dissecting the very system that tried to contain him. And what's coming next will not be a negotiation. It will be a reckoning. One measured not in words, but in results. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a dismantling by precision, a quiet, surgical recalibration of internal priorities masked as organizational efficiency. Lewis Hamilton, for all his success and awareness, didn't need confirmation. He could feel it. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Every detail, every deviation, every piece of silence wrapped in protocol, it all pointed in one direction. He wasn't being guided. He was being filtered out. The signs weren't explosive. They were deliberate. In simulator requests, Hamilton would outline specifics. Deeper traction mapping, advanced mechanical grip work, corner entry behavior under variable fuel loads. Critical, personalized drills he needed to adapt to the car's unique behavior. He was told the slots were full. Resources were stretched. Soon, they said. Noted, they replied. Nothing happened. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc had his sessions updated in real time. Adjustments based on his preferences were implemented before the next morning's run. His feedback became gospel. Hamilton's postponed, diluted, buried. Development priorities spoke even louder. Leclerc's side received aerodynamic evolutions that hadn't even been mentioned to Hamilton's crew. Wing elements reprofiled. Floor designs tweaked. Diffuser adjustments made for high-speed entry stability, all handed to Charles without hesitation. Hamilton's upgrades arrived slower. Often experimental. Frequently untested. Rarely optimized. The difference wasn't in language. It was in urgency. One driver was being enhanced. The other maintained. The meetings followed the same tone. Strategy sessions that used to revolve around collaboration started feeling rehearsed. Hamilton noticed how his input was acknowledged but never integrated. He would present data-backed concerns, tire degradation curves, sector trade-offs, fuel offset strategies, and hear only polite nods in return. No questions. No follow-up. No intention to engage. Meanwhile, when Leclerc spoke, people leaned in. Screens lit up. Engineers scribbled notes. Hamilton's voice echoed into a void that answered with compliance, not consideration. On-track operations confirmed it. Small inconsistencies compounded. During practice sessions, Hamilton's runs were often interrupted by traffic or weather windows that could have been avoided. His ideal lap window came late, when track evolution had shifted. He'd request tire pressures to be dialed in a certain way, only to discover post-session that the parameters had been slightly altered. Nothing illegal. Nothing blatant. Just enough to shift the feeling in the car. Just enough to take control out of his hands. Then came the moment that solidified the truth. He returned to the garage after a flying lap, an execution so smooth it should have been pinned to every wall in the engineering room, and asked for the data overlay. It wasn't there. Gone from the system. Not corrupted. Not delayed. Simply omitted. When pressed, the engineers said they hadn't received it. Another team said it wasn't recorded. The explanation was clean. Clinical. But wrong. Hamilton had driven long enough to know what he'd done. He hadn't made an error. He'd been made invisible. This wasn't mismanagement. This was orchestration. Slow, methodical sidelining wrapped in professionalism. And Lewis, ever composed, didn't explode. He internalized it. Because confrontation would play into the plan. That's what they wanted. Frustration. A headline. A crack. Instead, he adapted. Learned. Documented. Observed the cadence of suppression and turned it into fuel. He noticed how Leclerc's strategy options always included flexibility, undercut chances, tire variation, alternate stints. His own plans were rigid, often reactive. He wasn't given tools. He was given tests. Fuel loads heavy. Tire sets reused. Pit stop windows extended beyond logic. He was being used to manage data flow, not maximize performance. But he didn't push back in the room. He pushed back on track. Hamilton understood what was being built. It wasn't a car around him. It was a narrative. A future. One designed around a younger figure, a clean story, a legacy rebranded. Leclerc was the image. Hamilton was the instrument. But instruments don't stay quiet forever. Not when they still carve out lap times that confuse the simulation software. Not when their experience exposes flaws in even the most polished setups. Ferrari had chosen its direction. But they underestimated the cost of ghosting someone who thrives in the shadows. They thought muting his influence would soften his output. Instead, it sharpened it. He no longer relied on access. He relied on instinct. He began setting up his car by feel, adjusting to inconsistencies like terrain changes. And with every lap that defied their metrics, he reclaimed control. He wasn't being erased. He was being unleashed. And the garage knew. They saw it in the timing screens, in the overnight data analysis, in the race stints where he outlasted expected degradation, in the qualifying laps where he threaded impossibilities between apex and traction zones. He wasn't fading. He was ascending, untouched by internal narratives, unshaken by silence. The paddock started noticing too. Journalists whispered. Analysts paused. Questions began to bend toward uncomfortable truths. Are both sides equal? Is development really balanced? And through it all, Hamilton remained composed. Because he didn't need the truth spoken. He would show it. One race. One circuit. One moment where the script fell apart. That's all he needed. He wouldn't win through politics. He would win through precision. Through defiance measured not in emotion but in execution. And when that moment comes, and it will, every engineer who deleted data, every manager who delayed updates, every strategist who scripted the outcome, will be forced to answer a simple, undeniable reality. You can ignore a voice. You can suppress feedback. But you can't silence a storm once it reaches the track. Within the polished walls of Maranello, hierarchy doesn't wear a name badge. It hides behind protocol that smiles to your face and slowly moves you out of the frame. In Ferrari, you're never directly told where you stand. You feel it creeping into your role like a shadow you can't shake. You recognize it in the delays, in the decisions made without you, in the meetings where your contributions land in silence while others' ideas are applauded before they're finished speaking. It's in the tone of the strategy calls, in the late delivery of information, in the praise that's always quieter when it's aimed at you. For Lewis Hamilton, it wasn't one defining moment that broke the illusion. It was the quiet accumulation of strategic cold shoulders. Nothing screamed it louder than what followed the sprint win in Shanghai. He drove with the precision of a surgeon and the hunger of a rookie. He gave them a win. He handed them momentum. And the garage barely blinked. No roar, no arms thrown in the air, no emotion. Just a hollow congratulations and a return to the checklist. Then came the penalty. A disqualification wrapped in regulations and buried beneath technical jargon. And when the media storm erupted, the team's voice barely surfaced. No defense, no outrage, no fire, just a press release as empty as the celebrations that never came. Hamilton didn't confront. He didn't storm into the office, didn't throw a helmet, didn't demand loyalty. He watched. He listened. He read between the lines, tracing the architecture of a structure that had already decided its allegiance before the season began. He wasn't watching Leclerc. He wasn't questioning Vasseur. He was tracking the quiet, calculated ways a team can choose a favorite without saying it out loud. Since then, he's been different. Not in speed. In intent. He's no longer racing with trust. He's racing with precision, with a purpose far deeper than points. His radio check-ins are stripped to the essentials. Just data. Just metrics. Nothing emotional. The warmth is gone. The connection has been severed, replaced by a dialogue that feels more like a transaction. And yet, when Leclerc is in the exact same circumstances, the tone shifts, urgent, energizing, decisive. He's told to push, to fight, to seize opportunity. Hamilton is told to hold, to conserve, to wait for things that never come. The instructions may be dressed in strategy, but the truth is louder than the words. These aren't just tactical differences, they are reflections of how the drivers are valued. One gets the green light. The other gets red tape. One is encouraged to conquer. The other is asked to maintain. In every race briefing, In every post-session breakdown, the message is clear without ever being spoken. And Hamilton, with all his experience, doesn't miss any of it. He's watched how new parts are introduced. Aero updates, suspension tweaks, weight-saving mods, they all land on Leclerc's car first. The justification is always logical, but the pattern is unmistakable. Hamilton's side receives upgrades only after they've been proven safe, tested, cleared. He's become a second thought in a team that claims parity. Not overlooked, but handled, monitored, restricted. And still, he never complains. That's not how he plays this game. He retaliates with performance, with control, with execution. His lap times are statements. His tire stints are masterclasses. He turns strategy disadvantages into highlights. He holds positions longer than logic permits, forces overtakes in windows where they're not supposed to exist, extracts pace from setups that were never meant to favor him. He's racing with a mission, not to survive, but to expose. Inside the paddock, those paying attention are already whispering. Analysts, rival teams, even members of Ferrari's own infrastructure are noticing the gaps between instruction and intent, between treatment and talent. Some engineers, once neutral, are quietly logging these inconsistencies. They see who gets the tools, who gets the silence. They see who's building a legacy and who's being used to reinforce it. Hamilton knows this isn't just about this season. This is about power, about control, about systems that protect one narrative and suppress another. He's not waiting for fairness. He's documenting injustice with every apex. His rebellion isn't loud. It's calculated. It's methodical. Every move he makes is part of a bigger picture. Every silent radio reply is a loaded moment. Every lap, every pass, every refusal to yield becomes evidence. He's racing like a man who's been boxed in and found a way to redesign the box from the inside out. His silence isn't weakness. It's fuel. They gave him constraints. He turned them into weapons. They gave him orders. He turned them into warnings. They tried to manage him, contain him, reframe him, and all they did was make him sharper, more focused, more dangerous. They expected submission. What they got was defiance executed with elegance. Every time he climbs into that cockpit, he carries the weight of a system trying to keep him compliant, and the brilliance to dismantle it without a single complaint. He's rewriting the playbook they tried to trap him in. Not with words, with performance, with presence, with undeniable truth that cuts through favoritism and politics like a scalpel through noise. And when the moment arrives, because it will, when the world connects the dots he's been laying down lap after lap, when the telemetry aligns with the quiet outrage, when the curtain finally slips, it won't be a story of bitterness. It'll be a revelation. One written in speed, in silence, and in the relentless refusal to let history repeat itself. It's no longer whispered behind closed doors. It's embedded, calculated, and deployed with chilling efficiency. At Ferrari, manipulation no longer resembles chaos. It's become an art form, cloaked in professionalism, sanitized by procedure. There are no emails, no documentation, no directives spoken aloud. It's all encoded through subtle language and innocuous timing. Minor adjustments masked as precaution. Benign suggestions disguised as optimization. The execution is immaculate, quiet, nearly invisible. But the consequences ripple through every sector of the car and every layer of the strategy. The intent isn't destruction, it's erosion. Confidence, momentum, instinct, slowly dismantled piece by piece, until the driver stops trusting the machine beneath him. It doesn't take much. A slight variation in the center of pressure. A fractionally delayed radio message. Tire temps just outside the operating window. Brake behavior that shifts under load. Nothing illegal. Nothing overt. Just 1,000 cuts that never bleed, but never heal. One missed apex leads to another. One poorly timed stop cascades into compromised stint planning. One corner of doubt becomes a lap of hesitation. One weekend of hesitation becomes a narrative. After Shanghai, the whispers became data. Lewis Hamilton felt it, not through lap times, but through sensation. The machine didn't respond the way it used to. It wasn't unbalanced, it was disconnected. The rear would dance without warning. The entry phase required adjustments that hadn't been necessary in years. He noticed patterns, inconsistencies, behaviors that didn't match the conditions, the data, or his experience. He raised concerns. Gently, at first. The replies came soft, smiling, vague. Normal variation. Track evolution. We'll look into it. But nothing changed. The unease deepened. So he went around them. Not out of defiance, but survival. Conversations were initiated discreetly with former allies from Brackley. Trusted minds. Technical voices that knew his driving philosophy. Professionals who understood when feedback was real and when it was manipulated. Hamilton didn't speculate. He asked for confirmation. Sent logs. Shared overlays. Sought validation not through gut, but through measurement. What returned was troubling. Not outright sabotage, but alignment between instinct and irregularity, between suspicion and numbers. He began constructing something far more dangerous than noise. A record. A timeline of moments. Changes in setup. Divergences from simulation. Notes from engineering briefings that led nowhere. Subtle choices that always tilted performance just enough to matter. It wasn't obvious. That's what made it powerful. He wasn't looking for proof of foul play. He was documenting something bigger, an environment shaped to suppress under the guise of parody. Hamilton isn't loud when he prepares for war. He's deliberate, measured, relentless in silence. What he's compiling is more than data. It's a pattern, a system of decisions and outcomes. Each item on its own means little, but together they become undeniable. Enough to collapse the illusion. Enough to force the world to confront what's happening behind the curtain. He's not accusing. He's waiting. Because he knows the exact moment to speak isn't when he's angry, it's when they're most vulnerable. Inside Ferrari, the tension is metastasizing. Engineers tread lightly. Managers rehearse statements. Communications are scrutinized. Meetings run long, end late, repeat frequently. Nobody knows what Hamilton has compiled. That's the terror. It's not the fear of exposure, it's the fear of being blindsided by it. Because he's said nothing. He's leaked nothing. But every silent nod, every brief glance, every unfinished sentence implies one thing: he knows. The garage feels colder. Every minor mistake, every mistimed call, now carries the weight of something bigger. The internal narrative of unity is cracking. Team members once confident in their positions now second-guess every decision. Leadership fears that whatever they're hiding is already outside the building, circulating through quiet conversations, encrypted messages, informal handshakes with people who hold power. If even a fraction of what Hamilton holds is made public, it won't be a scandal. It'll be a collapse. And Hamilton, he's calm, unshaken, focused not on damage, but on timing. This isn't revenge. It's precision. He's dismantling a system that thought it could control him. Not with rage, but with evidence. He doesn't need the press. He doesn't need the cameras. All he needs is the right channel, the right leak, the right moment. One race weekend. One suspicious call. One broken silence. And the entire structure will shatter. The threat isn't in what he might say. It's in the fact that he won't have to say it. A single data sheet leaked anonymously. A quiet confirmation from a former technician. One short audio file. That's all it will take. The entire racing world is watching, and Ferrari knows it. Their fortress of control, built on decades of mythology, could be torn apart by one man who refused to be used. This isn't about a car. It's about dignity, legacy, autonomy. Hamilton isn't protecting just his reputation. He's safeguarding the truth. Because once that truth sees daylight, it cannot be unspoken. And when it breaks free, it won't trickle. It'll detonate. At Imola, the imbalance wasn't shouted, it was orchestrated. On the surface, everything appeared synchronized, but under the layers of procedure and politeness, the divide was impossible to miss for anyone paying attention. Charles Leclerc, surrounded by urgency and hyperfocus, was in constant dialogue with his team. Instructions flowed, conditions were updated, timing windows discussed mid-corner. His every breath received acknowledgement. Every lap was shaped with real-time support, a race built collectively, second by second. In the other cockpit, Lewis Hamilton was met with emptiness. No tactical refinement. No conversation. No sense of presence. Feedback given was absorbed into nothingness. Questions echoed back unanswered. Inputs faded into silence. He wasn't part of a collaboration. He was a solo act. But he didn't slow. He didn't crumble. He kept driving, not because he believed in a shared goal, but because he'd finally seen the architecture of exclusion for what it was. It wasn't an accident. It was structure. And he was tracing every seam. He stopped looking for connection and started recording everything. Lap after lap became a logbook. Every delay, every muted call, every unexplained choice was noted. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. The language of favoritism doesn't scream. It whispers. It delays a response by 2 seconds. It adjusts the undercut by a lap too late. It praises the wrong performance. It thanks one driver and overlooks the other. And while they played chess in the open, Hamilton built his counterstrike in silence. The warmth that once wrapped around him was gone. The gentle camaraderie, the casual laughter, the public diplomacy evaporated. What remains is lean and alert. His steps are quieter. His eyes track movement. His words are fewer, but heavier. He doesn't participate in the theater anymore. He's outside of it, observing it like a strategist mapping enemy territory. He no longer fills the space. He controls it through absence. He was brought in not as a threat, but as a prop. A legendary name to enhance someone else's story. A symbol to be placed beside the chosen one, as if proximity could transfer greatness. They assumed he would be ornamental, reverent, and easy to sideline. They didn't understand that Hamilton isn't decorative, he's tactical. He doesn't support narratives. He dismantles them. And the moment they tried to box him in, he began cataloging every brick. They imagined he would help elevate Leclerc. Instead, he is redefining the scale they use to measure everything. Leclerc remains fast, hungry, gifted. But now he's living under the weight of another presence. Not a mentor. Not a rival. Something else entirely. A presence that doesn't need to say anything to be overwhelming. One that reminds the room who rewrote records, who turned machinery into myth, who knows exactly how dynasties are dismantled, from within. Every time Hamilton is left out of a strategy conversation, every moment of radio silence, every unexplained loss in performance, it becomes fuel. Not for fury, but for focus. He's not shouting for justice. He's storing ammunition. His silence isn't passive. It's an active weapon. A tool he's used before. He knows the game because he helped write it. And now, he's reprogramming the outcome. He watches the inner workings with clinical distance. Notices the engineers who hesitate. The meetings that exclude him by minutes. The debriefs that frame the wrong questions. The body language of a team that doesn't realize it's being studied. He's not there to disrupt with noise. He's preparing for collapse without warning. By the time they hear the fall, it will have already happened. They mistake stillness for surrender. But Hamilton isn't idle. He's sharpening. Reconstructing every scene. Rewinding every message. Timing the gaps. Measuring every moment they underestimate him. Every decision cloaked in fairness but anchored in favoritism is another piece of evidence. Not for revenge. For clarity. Because once you see the design, you stop trying to fit inside it. He's building something they can't detect. Not an explosion. A shift. A turn so deliberate, so calculated, it won't feel like rebellion. It'll feel like inevitability. He's not interested in stealing attention. He's crafting erasure, the kind that leaves no trace of the narrative they tried to push. He's not looking to beat Leclerc. He's preparing to make the comparison irrelevant. This isn't a fall from grace. It's the forging of something harder. Something beyond titles. Beyond speed. Something colder, smarter, untouchable. Hamilton's greatness has never been about moments. It's been about longevity in chaos, reinvention through resistance, dominance through strategy, not force. What they're facing now isn't a man who's losing. It's one who's waiting for the perfect moment to rewrite the conclusion without ever raising his voice. And when it happens, when the shift finally detonates, it won't look like triumph. It'll look like erasure. A recalibration so devastating that everything they built around him will be irrelevant. It won't need noise. It won't need explanation. It will happen in silence, just like it began. And that silence will echo louder than any podium cheer they ever denied him.